Today I'm going to show you how to make a super simple sword inside of your game. Now I'm not going to be going over any animations or anything since it just takes a long time, and all I really want you to understand here is the basics of how to make a tool, how to adjust the grip, how to make it deal damage, etc, etc. So let's get started. So first of all we actually need to make our tool. So I'm going to sort of be making almost like a sword, but it's going to sort of be a proddy sword because there's no animation, it's not going to swing. So I'm just going to make a regular sword. So start off by inserting a part, or if you already have a 3D object, you can do that as well. Just import it in. But for this tutorial, we're just going to be making one. So when you're working with tools, you can actually resize them however you want and literally make them whatever you want them to ever be. You could literally make this thing a block if you wanted it to. So you can duplicate parts, and you can just scale them down however you want just to make your model the way you want it. Now this is looking pretty awful and I cannot be bothered to change it, so we're just going to head with it. So once you've actually got your model sorted, you can see that we have two parts, right? Now one thing that we're going to need is a damage part, and essentially what that means is we just need a part that whenever someone touches it, it deals damage to them. But we don't want that to be our whole thing because that could also deal damage to our player as well. So we almost want it at the end of our sword. So I'm just going to duplicate this, or you can just create a new part. I'm going to drag it up sort of just at the tip of the sword, make it a little bit bigger, just like that. And obviously that's very ugly, so we're just going to turn the transparency all the way up on that one. And I'm just going to rename that part damage part. The next thing you're going to need is a handle. Now the handle pretty much acts as the grip of your tool. So wherever your handle is on your tool is where the player's hand is going to hold it. So I'm just going to duplicate this part again. I'm going to move it down to the bottom of my tool and just scale it up a little bit just so we can see it. Then once I'm happy with it, I'm just going to turn the transparency all the way up again, and make sure you rename your part handle with the correct capitalization that I have. That's very, very important. You don't miss out the capital H. And then with the kind of decoration parts like this, we can just control click to select them both, head into the model tab and just press union, which will just join them together. So we haven't got to worry about welding these different parts together. I'm just going to rename this sword base, but you don't have to rename it. Now we actually need a tool, so head into your workspace, search for a tool, and then all you want to do is just drag your sword base, your damage part and your handle, or whatever other components you have inside your tool. Now in theory this would work, but it would fall to pieces because we haven't got anything welded and nothing is actually stuck together. So whenever you're working with tools, you need to use something called weld constraints. Now what weld constraints does, it essentially takes through a part 0 and a part 1, and a part 0 is pretty much the base and a part 1 is what you want to attach to it. So we're going to just head into our tool. We're going to search for a weld constraint. If you click on it, you'll see what I was talking about just a second ago. We got part 0 and part 1. So part 0 should always sort of be like the primary part. So it's usually best to weld things to the handle. So I'm just going to select my part 0 and click on handle, and then we need to start welding out other parts to it. So I'm just going to press part 1 and I'm going to add my damage part, and you can see that it actually comes up on our tool as a little green diagram just to show you that it is fully welded. But we also need to weld our sword base to our handle as well, so just duplicate your weld constraint, keep the part 0 to handle, and just change the part 1 to sword base. Now you will have to do this for every other part inside your tool. You can do it with scripts, but I don't think it's super reliable depending on how many parts you have. If you have maybe 3 or 4 parts that you just want to weld together, you can't be bothered to go through it, sure, do it through a script, but this is just a short form, easy way to do it, but it's a lot more time consuming. Okay, great, our tool is actually ready. So we can drag it into our starter pack, and if we test out our game, you can see that once we pull out our tool, it's actually in our hands. But it's not really looking the right way because this should be facing that way and clearly not. So head out of testing mode, drag it back into your workspace, and what we want to be doing here is changing the handle's rotation, because the handle's rotation is pretty much the rotation of your entire tool in your player's hand. So I'm just going to rotate mine 90 degrees. It doesn't matter which way since this is kind of a universal rotation tool. Place it back in my starter pack and hit play. And there we go, you can see it is now the right way. And if you wanted to adjust where your player is actually holding the handle, you can just move the handle back just a little bit so then it's more firmly indented into the palm of the player's hand. So since I'm not actually going through any animations in this tutorial, which is going to make this sword swing, I just kind of want my tool to be facing outwards, almost like a spear. So I'm just going to rotate my handle 90 degrees on this axis. And now if I quickly just test it out, just to make sure it's working, and there we go, we can see that it's actually pointing the way that I want it to. Now you don't have to have yours like this. As long as you have an animation that sort of throws it out or swings it, then you'll be all set. But I just don't want to go through animations today, so I'm just making my tool already point out just by default. So now we can actually start working on the script for our sword, because it's all very well having a sword, but we need some way for players to take damage. So we're going to do this all on a server script. So head into your tool and just add a server script. I'm going to call this damage script. Get rid of the default text. And first of all, we need to just define some variables. So we're going to get our sword and our damage part. So we're just going to say local sword equals script.parent, local damage part equals sword colon wait for child damage part. And then we need to make a little cooldown variable, which is going to be called can damage. And it sounds pretty self-explanatory, but I'll explain it as we go along. So we're going to say local can damage, and we're just going to set it to false for now. So now we're going to be utilizing two methods. We're going to be using the activated method and the touched method. So whenever you're dealing with a tool, it does in fact come with several methods that you can use. So if we quickly say sword dot, you can see that whenever we scroll through the list, we have activated, changed, equipped, unequipped, and child added. Those are sort of the main ones. There are other things like deactivated and attribute changed and everything, but those are kind of global. The method that we want to use is activated, which essentially means whenever a player clicks or uses the activate button on their phone. So we're going to say sword.activated connect function, and all we're going to do here is we're going to detect if our can damage variable is false, and then we're going to enable it for a second and then turn it back to false. And you'll see why we do this in a little bit. So we're just going to say if can damage is equal to false, then can damage equals true, wait 1, can damage equals false. So this bit here is essentially going to be how much you want your cooldown to be. So once the player clicks, they're going to be able to attack for 1 second, or the sword will be able to do damage for a second, and then it will go back to not being able to do damage. So next we actually need to detect when our damage part is touched, and then we want to deal damage to the player that touched it. So we're going to say damage part.touched connect function hit, so we're grabbing the hit variable from our touch function. If can damage then, which essentially means if can damage equals true, which is what we set in here for 1 second. And we're going to say hit.parent.humanoid colon take damage, and then however much damage you want the player to take. So for example, a regular humanoid usually has 100 health, so I want them to take 10 health from my sword every single time it hits them. And if you're confused on what hit.parent does, essentially what we're doing is we're grabbing the hit parameter through here, because you can see once we actually call our touched method, it returns a hit value, or a function other part base part. Now you don't have to call this hit, you can call it touch part or result or whatever you want to call it, but all it actually means is it's just returning the data from something that has been touched by this damage part. And then all we're doing is we're saying hit.parent, so that's the parent of whatever has hit it. We're grabbing the humanoid and we're making it take some damage. So now we can test it, but first of all we need something to test it on. So I'm just going to quickly grab this noob NPC that I just found from the toolbox. I'm going to head into my game and let's see what happens when we touch him with our sword. So you can see as I touch him, nothing is happening, but as soon as I left click, it starts doing damage. And that damage lasts for about a second. Now that may be too much, but it was just because of the amount of requests that I sent by literally spamming his neck with the sword. So yeah, you can change it to however you want, you can do whatever you like with it, change the handle, change the grip, you can even import blender models and stuff to actually replace this sword because I know it's very ugly. And yeah, just make it your own. Anyways, that's been it for this tutorial. If it did help you out, please make sure to like and subscribe. If you have any comments or concerns or your code isn't working, please make sure to leave a comment or join our Discord server. We have a dedicated space for people to help you out. Make sure to also join our Roblox group. If you do and you're in the Discord server, you'll also get a really nice role in there that just makes you stand out from everyone else. Anyways, that's been it for me. I will see you all later.